Ever since 2019, people have been speculating about what we'll see in the sequel to one of Nintendo's most revered titles of the Zelda series. Little did we know that it would take a whole nother 2 years before we got a second glimpse of the game at E3 2021. And even with what was shown, there's still plenty of room for theories and speculation regarding its story, gameplay, and how it may tie into past games. One topic often brought up is the role that Zelda will play in this brand new adventure. While the series is called The Legend of Zelda, it's rather confusing as most of the games revolve around the hero Link as opposed to Princess Zelda. In many cases, she acts as a damsel in distress, but not to the extent of someone such as Princess Peach. In many ways, the princess contributes to the story, examples being the one from Twilight Princess who sacrifices herself to save Midna, and Tetra, a pirate who is later revealed to be the Princess of Hyrule. Occasionally, she'll even be a playable character, to some extent. As of now, we don't have a Zelda game with Zelda as a fully playable character. When the first trailer for the sequel to Breath of the Wild was released, we saw not only Link, but also the princess exploring the underground caverns of Hyrule. Up until now, Zelda has been at Hyrule Castle where she fought off the Calamity for over a century, following his attack on Hyrule and the deaths of the champions and Kain. Breath of the Wild was a game set in this world's apocalyptic future, while the princess continued to hold off Calamity Ganon, although her power was slowly diminishing. All interactions the princess had with the hero were in the past, and it was only at the end of the game where she would finally be reunited with Link in the present. Breath of the Wild's main focus was its open world and freedom, which is why most of the game's story is kept in the past. But with Zelda now free, she uses her time to explore underground ruins with the hero as seen in the sequel's first trailer. Zelda's no longer bound to Hyrule Castle as the Calamity has been dealt with, leading many people to believe that the princess will play a much bigger role in the game's story. Perhaps even be a playable character. Today we'll look at how this could work for Breath of the Wild 2, while also taking into account the most recent trailer. And joining me today will be the folks over at Commonwealth Realm. A link to their video will be in the description below. It's important to first talk about bits from the E3 2021 trailer. Zelda has much less of a presence in this teaser. In fact, the only shot we get with her is the one where she falls deep underground. It's likely this takes place directly after this shot from the first trailer, and marks the moment where the two get separated. As per tradition, the hero needs to rescue Zelda from Ganondorf's clutches before it's too late. But is the plot really going to be that simple? Given what we already know about this incarnation of Zelda, along with what's present in both trailers, perhaps her overall contribution to the story will be much more prominent in this game. I highly doubt that the princess would be killed off so early in the game, assuming this takes place close to the beginning, and even if she's technically dead, it's not enough to stop Zelda. In Spirit Tracks, she's without a body for most of the game, having the traits of a spirit. One could argue that at this moment, the princess isn't alive. In fact, it's ironic that the game where Zelda dies is the one where she's most involved in the gameplay. But how involved will she be in the sequel to Breath of the Wild? I still think it's possible that we'll have some form of playable Zelda, and not only that, but she could also heavily impact the storytelling part of the game. How would this happen? 2 words. Underground exploration.
If there's one thing Nintendo's good at, it's advertising their games without spoiling too much. In fact, when it comes to series such as The Legend of Zelda, players are often left with even more questions than answers. The sequel's first trailer was solely focused on the underground ruins explored by the princess and the hero, leading many to believe that much of Breath of the Wild 2 would be focused on the layer below Hyrule's surface. However, the most recent trailer for the game contrasts this, with numerous floating islands, along with producer Aonuma himself stating that Link's adventure will be extended to the skies above Hyrule. The Zelda team continues to throw curveballs our way, making it much harder to understand which direction the story will be going given their unpredictable nature. However, we can't rule out the possibility of underground exploration because of this new information, since the developers have proved themselves to be unpredictable. It's possible that their intention was to once again throw us off in this new trailer, to make us believe that Breath of the Wild 2 won't be focused on underground ruins, but those floating in the sky. In reality, there's nothing to suggest that it couldn't be a mix of both. But that will be a lot of ground to cover for our hero alone, and that's where Princess Zelda comes in, particularly the shot of her falling into the abyss. Most of Breath of the Wild's story comes from the numerous ruins and structures scattered across Hyrule. The rest of its story takes place prior to the game's events, whether it be of the Great Calamity 100 years ago or the origins of the Sheikah technology, constructed by a highly advanced civilization for the battle against Calamity Ganon over 10,000 years ago. Aside from what's seen on the tapestry, little is known about Hyrule's distant past. In fact, it wasn't until the prophecy that people started to believe the stories of an ancient evil, thinking it to be a myth or a fairy tale. The sequel's first trailer added more to this mystery, with Link and Zelda journeying through underground ruins. They soon wound up within a chamber, and at the center of it, a corpse frozen in place. The Gerudo imagery and cave paintings tell us that this is most likely Ganondorf. He was down here all this time, long before the Great Calamity or even the events that took place 10,000 years prior to Breath of the Wild. Calamity Ganon was simply a distraction, or if you prefer, a puppet, with the real Ganondorf hidden deep below Hyrule Castle.
No doubt that something must have happened which led to the duo's exploration of these mysterious ruins. Perhaps it has to do with Zelda's remark of Vah Ruta no longer working, and the sequel will immediately kick off from that point. Or they'll notice that not all of the malice has vanished, following the substance to its source. Maybe it will even lead them to the mysterious caverns seen in the trailer. In this shot, the two see something, but only Zelda reacts. Link turns his head to look at her, almost as if what's seen only phases her. Described as a scholar and one interested in the Sheikah technology, it makes sense for her to know something that no one else does. Combine that with the shot of her falling deep within Hyrule's caverns, and this all just gets you thinking. What if Zelda's the one who will be doing the underground exploration of the game? If Ganondorf was sealed underground, it explains why most don't know about him in the present, especially since he would have been down here for a very long time. Even the royal family seems unaware of his presence, or perhaps records of this chamber do exist somewhere in the castle, but no one has bothered to look into it. After all, from their point of view, Ganondorf is the very same being as the one taking the form of Calamity Ganon. With it now sealed away by the princess, they'd think that this threat has passed when the real battle has only just begun. And it really makes you think, what other secrets are being hidden underground? Is it just Ganondorf, or are there more clues just waiting to be discovered? Perhaps more information on Hyrule's distant past, or what led to Ganondorf's seal long ago? Everything about Zelda's character makes her the perfect person to uncover this forgotten history. While barely seen in Breath of the Wild, her overall role was an important one, to use her sealing power against Calamity Ganon once he broke free. With the sudden death of her mother and mentor, Zelda was forced to train alone as a means of unlocking her sacred power, an attempt that proved to be fruitless. Only after Link's sacrifice did she unlock this power, not out of rigorous training, but the love she had for her appointed knight. Throughout the story, Zelda is portrayed as someone with an interest in ancient technology, visiting numerous sites as a means of learning more about the Sheikah and their constructs, going as far as to keep records of her findings in a room filled with various books and research material. Now that her power has been unlocked, with Calamity Ganon sealed away, the princess can focus on her studies. Zelda would no doubt be interested in the history of Hyrule itself, especially after the reveal of Ganondorf the Puppet Master. Her journey back to the surface may even be in the form of playable sections where both Zelda and the player learn more about Hyrule's history and the sealing of Ganondorf. While her bits focus on a more linear experience, with an emphasis on story, the majority of the game would continue to be experienced as the hero Link, an open world consisting of both Hyrule's surface and the numerous floating islands above. But how does one link these two segments together in a way that makes it coherent? To answer this question, we must look at a different game. That game obviously being Paper Mario. Did I lose you yet? Don't worry, you'll understand why this is being brought up. In the first two Paper Mario games, the gameplay was divided into two different segments. Well, technically three if we take into account Thousand Year Door. The first was Mario himself, where he goes through 8 different chapters of the story to either free the star spirits or collect the crystal stars. Most of the game was experienced in this section, however, in between each chapter you briefly play as Princess Peach. These gameplay segments are much shorter than the individual chapters, though they are added in as a means of both experiencing the princess's perspective and occasionally assisting Mario with his adventures. And this structure would work very well with the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Completing one of the many dungeons in the open world could follow up with a short segment of Zelda exploring the ruins underground as she makes her way back up to the surface, learning more about the events that transpired thousands of years ago. If the Zelda team wanted to continue with the freedom of Breath of the Wild, you could do something similar to A Link Between Worlds and let the player complete the dungeons in whatever order they want. So while Zelda's portions take on a linear experience primarily focused on storytelling, you're given as much freedom as possible in Hyrule's open world. It's the same as Paper Mario, except the player gets to choose what chapters to take on first. And even if there's a certain order to the dungeon completion, it means that the Zelda team could include more of the story into the open world portion of the game. There's a lot of potential with this idea, as it puts Zelda in a situation where she's playable, but not to the point where it sounds impossible to implement.
A perfect example of how it could play out comes from Horizon Zero Dawn. In many ways, the story is similar to Breath of the Wild. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where machines run rampant, within a society that was highly advanced with their technology. The protagonist Aloy sets off on an adventure to find her mother and learn more about the events leading up to humanity's destruction. And throughout the game, lots of Aloy's discoveries come from exploring underground facilities, now completely devoid of life. Over time, she finds the answers she's looking for, the identity of her mother, who Aloy is, and how this thriving society came to its end. It's interesting just how many connections exist between both games, especially since neither took inspiration from the other, as Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn released at similar times. These hypothetical segments where you play as Zelda don't have to be that challenging either. Maybe include a few simple puzzles similar to Horizon. One problem though in that case, with including a playable Zelda in the sequel, would be her sealing power. Following the events of the first game, the princess would have access to this ability. If Zelda was given a role similar to Link's, there would be no challenge to the combat. So in a way, not only does the separation of the two give Zelda a chance to have her own segments, but it removes her from the core gameplay, maintaining that sense of challenge when we play as Link. In fact, this gives players an opportunity to see just how powerful the princess is with her awakened powers. And Age of Calamity already gives her a moveset based on this sacred power, so Breath of the Wild sequel could implement a similar playstyle depending on whether or not they want to include combat in her sections. One other idea is giving Zelda the Sheikah Slate to use its abilities, since the hero now has the green hand. However, what has been seen in both trailers suggests that, since the technology has already served its purpose, is no longer needed and has returned to the ground. It's likely that the Sheikah Slate will share a similar fate, especially since Zelda now has access to her divine powers. Zelda's internal struggle with her duties as princess and interest in ancient technology is a big part of her character arc in Breath of the Wild, and where Breath of the Wild 2 seems to serve as a turning point in her story. Her shorter hair may take on a symbolic meaning of the end of one life and beginning of another. The fact that Zelda accompanies Link to these ruins as opposed to staying in Hyrule Castle represents the princess embracing the scholar side of her. She no longer feels useless and bound to her duties as a princess with the blood of the goddess.
If anything, it would be strange if Zelda didn't contribute to the sequel story. The whole point of her character in Breath of the Wild was about embracing who she was and how her interest in the Sheikah technology was a strength, not a weakness. One example being the questline of Vah Ruta, as it was thanks to Zelda's research that the Zora knew of the Divine Beast's weak point. And as stated in the beginning of the video, there have been moments where Zelda was both a playable character and helped in the combat portions. And we still don't know what happens to the Master Sword. Does Link still have it with him, but lost its power due to the malice damaging it? Or perhaps the state of his arm makes it unusable? Another possibility is that it falls down with Zelda into the chasm, and her goal is to return the blade to its rightful hero. It would give her even more of a reason to reunite with Link. Perhaps the two meet up at the surface, or even Hyrule Castle, where a final confrontation with Ganondorf takes place. It's debatable whether or not she really is a damsel in distress in the first game, since she managed to hold back the calamity for 100 years, and many of the battles against Ganon are only won because of the princess's power. Another reason she needs to survive this fall and be kept alive until the final confrontation. She's just as important as Link and Ganondorf, being one of the Trinity characters of the series. In conclusion, the Zelda team could absolutely include Zelda as a playable character in the upcoming sequel, but it all comes down to the execution of it. From what we've gone over in this video, I hope that I've at least convinced you of how she could be implemented into the game in a believable way. Before I end this video, I'd like to thank Conrad of Commonwealth Realm for joining me, and a link to their video regarding Breath of the Wild 2's open world and sky gameplay will be down below. I've been NintendoBlackCrisis, and I will see you all next time.